Hello, mathematicians. This is Miss Backfish, and I am here to talk to you about a concept that we talk about in a lot of different math classes, and that is the concept of completing the square. And there are several things that we actually do with this, but I wanted to give you a video that just really starts at the beginning of why is this called this, what are we doing, and then gets you started on your way to success with completing the square. So first off, let's just do some background here. If I have an expression like this is called a binomial because it's two terms, and my binomial here is being squared, okay? If I square that, I have to be careful and not think of it as x squared plus 2 squared because that's not how this works. What this means is x plus 2 times x plus 2. So I have to use whatever it is that you like to use, whether it's distributive property or maybe FOIL. I have to make sure I multiply everything over here with everything over here, and that will give me x squared plus 2x plus 2x plus 4. And then when I combine my like terms, that gives me x squared plus 4x plus 4. Okay, so if we looked at this and just said, oh, that's going to be x squared plus 2 squared, so x squared plus 4, we'd be wrong because we'd completely miss this middle term. So anytime I want to square a binomial, and that's what we're doing here, squaring a binomial, something with two terms, I have to think about completely multiplying it out. So for instance, let's do x minus 7 squared. X minus 7 squared is x minus 7 times x minus 7, and I get x squared minus 7x minus 7x plus 49. So when I simplify, put my like terms together here, this is what I get. Now, what I want you to see is that there is a pattern here, okay? It's not going to be x squared plus 4 or x squared plus 2 squared. It's not going to be x squared minus or plus 7 squared. But those are still there. The x squared's at the beginning, the 4 is at the back. X squared's at the beginning, then 49's at the back. And then there's a pattern for how we get this middle term. You notice that both here and here, I was adding the same term twice. Well, that happens every time. So we can do this in a very generic way and have a formula for squaring a binomial. Like, I'm just going to call it a plus b. A times a is a squared. B times b is b squared. So it's still going to be this squared and this squared at the beginning and at the end. But those middle two terms come from a times b, and b times a is the same thing as a times b. So we can say that this is our formula for how it always works out. So when we're completing the square, what we are doing is we're trying to get things to look like this format, like this, because when they look like those, we can rewrite them as this, as the square of a binomial. So this is a binomial that I'm squaring, and what it gives me is it gives me a perfect square trinomial. A trinomial means 1, 2, 3 terms that is a perfect square. In other words, that is perfectly some binomial squared. So completing the square is about trying to get a perfect square trinomial so that we can say, oh, okay, I can rewrite this as a binomial squared. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples going the other way. Let's say I have a trinomial, 3 terms, 1, 2, 3, and I want to factor it. Well, the way we usually do it when there's no leading coefficient here is we say what two numbers multiply to give me this and add to give me this. Well, the answer there is 5 and 5, which we notice are the same number. So this can be factored as x plus 5 times x plus 5, or we could rewrite that as x plus 5 squared. Let's look at another one. How about if I have x squared minus 6x plus 9. And I want to factor that. Okay? Well, 9 is 3 times 3. 6 is not 3 plus 3. It's negative 3 plus negative 3. So I'm going to go ahead and make both of these negative, and that still works for 9. Negative 3 times negative 3 gives me 9. Negative 3 plus negative 3 gives me negative 6. So this can be written as x minus 3, x minus 3. Notice that it's a minus because this was a minus. All right, when this is a minus, this is going to be a minus here. All right, so I have something here that I can rewrite as a binomial squared. This is a perfect square trinomial. That's what I want. That's what completing the square is all about, is getting one of these. So for instance, if somebody said, hey, you have this, what could you fill in here to make yourself a perfect square trinomial so that it can be rewritten as a binomial squared? You would have to have a way of figuring out that 9 needs to go here. All right, that's what we're going to do first, and that's really the main thing you're doing when you're completing the square. Okay, so right now we're just looking at expressions. We're not really looking at this in context of like solving equations or anything else. We're just looking at how do I get this expression to work out to be some binomial squared. Okay, what do I have to add here? Here's how it works. Here's how we can figure that out. And this is the process you go through every time. Look at the middle term. Look at the what we call the linear term, or if you think of this as ax squared plus bx plus c. And by the way, the only ones we're going to look at here are the ones that have a as 1. If you want to have a equals a number other than 1, we need to do a little bit more at the beginning. But we're looking at the b right here. So look at the b. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take half of b. Now, the way I want you to do that is taking half of something is the same idea as dividing it by 2. So take your b and just write it over 2. Okay? In other words, b over 2. And we can simplify that sometimes, and if we can, we do. All right? That's the first step. The next step is square that number. Okay? In other words, that's squared. Now, if it's one that stayed in fraction form, and we'll get some like that, to square a fraction, you basically just square the top and square the bottom. But this did not. This simplified and is no longer a fraction, so I'm going to square it, and that gives me 16. 16 is the number that needs to be right here. If I was dealing with an equation where I had two sides to the equation I was trying to solve or something, I would have to make sure if I add 16 on one side, I do on another side too. But here, this is not really a side of my equation. This is just my result. You can think of it as like this. Okay? So now what two numbers multiply to give me 16 and add to give me 8? That's 4 and 4. Positive 4, positive 4. If this is positive, this is positive. If this was a minus, this would be a minus. Now another pattern I want you to notice here is, what did we get when we took half of b? Whatever number we get right here when we take half of b, that's going to be the same number that goes right here. If this number, when I take half of b, is positive, this will be positive. If it's negative, this will be negative. And what would make it positive or negative? If b was positive or negative. So this is the process. Every single time we're doing completing the square, this is the process. So let's look at another one. Let's say we have x squared minus 12x plus blank. And we need to know what can be put in that blank so that I can write this as x plus or minus something squared. Okay. First step, take half of b. b here is negative 12. Write it as negative 12 over 2. This will help you later. That's negative 6. Okay. Next step, square that number, meaning multiply it times itself. Negative 6 squared is 36. That's what goes here. And then I'm going to rewrite it as a binomial squared, and the binomial that would be squared here is minus 6. X minus 6. Because if I multiply out x minus 6 times x minus 6, look at what happens. And I want you to see this because I want you to see that this is the reason we have to take half of the b, is because b ends up coming from adding something twice. So whatever's in there twice, that's the number I want for right here. Okay? So that's why the process is what it is. Okay, let's try a few more. Make sure you have some scratch paper handy because I am going to ask you to number your paper 1 through 10 and start writing down answers. Okay, so we're going to say we're filling in the blank to complete the square. We're making a complete square, which means something that can be written as something squared. All right. There is number 1. Go ahead and follow the same steps we did back here to figure out what goes in that blank. You may need to hit pause as we're going here because then I'm going to go on to the next one. All right, this one. Let's go with this. Hit pause if you need to. You're filling in the blank to make a nice square, perfect square trinomial. Something that I could factor as a binomial squared. All right, so you're going through the same process each time to figure out what number goes in the blank. Now, once you have all those numbers, I want you to go back and think about how to write that as a binomial squared. In other words, it'll be x plus or minus something. Okay, go ahead and write all of this on your paper. X plus or minus something squared. The number that goes in here, we're going to call that, sorry for the bell, we're going to call this number 5. So number 1 is here, number 2 is here, number 3 is here on your paper. 5 is what goes here. 6, 7, 8. Okay? Now please hit pause and allow enough time to finish all of those before we go on. All right, going on, I want to go ahead and make sure we're all on the same page on this. Take half of b, that gives me 7, square it, and that's what goes here. Now remember we talked about whatever you got when you took half of b, that's what's going to be right here. It's positive, so it's going to be plus 7. This sign equals that sign every time. The sign in front of b is what sign you'll get here. Next up, half of b is negative 2. That number is what goes here. Negative 2 squared is 4. Keep in mind, don't let the calculator mess you up if you type it in wrong. If you're going to square a number, it doesn't matter if it was a negative or a positive, it's going to turn out positive. So notice I put a plus on every single one of these because every single one there's going to be a plus when I add that number. Okay. Next up, half of 20 is 10. 10 squared is 100. It's a positive 10, so I write plus 10. So on the paper where I've asked you to number, make sure your number 1 says 49 and so on. And last but not least, half of negative 18 is negative 9. Square that, I get 81. And over here, I get negative 9. For every single one of these, if I multiply this out using FOIL or distributive property, I will get this, every single one. Okay, so next, I'm going to go back to my directions here, and I'm going to add something. We said we're going to take half a b, we're going to square it, and then I'm going to add, this means this is going to factor now as x plus, we just said whatever half a b is, that's what goes there. In other words, this is a sort of generic way of saying, and this doesn't really have anything to do with that part below there. All right, this is a generic way of saying that what goes in the parentheses here is always half of b. That's always my half of b, half of b. And we've said half of b, another way of saying half of b is to say b over 2. That's why I keep writing that like that. Now, the main reason I keep writing it like that is because it gets a little bit ickier, official math term, it's a little bit yuckier when we have an odd number instead of an even number, because dividing an odd number by 2 doesn't come out as cleanly. So let's look at a couple of examples of that. Let's say I have this, and I'm trying to complete that square. When I take half of b, it's important that I understand how to write that. And I said write it over 2. That's because that's what we're going to do, and we'll be done. Here, 8 over 2 simplifies. Here, 7 over 2 does not simplify. So that's it. That's my half of b. So when I go to factor, this is going to be x plus 7 over 2 squared. Now I still have to figure out what goes in here by squaring that. To square a number that's a fraction, you just square the top, 7 times 7, and square the bottom, 2 times 2. So that's how we do it if it's an odd number. Let's try another one. b is negative 5, so half of b means negative 5 over 2. So when I come over here to write that as a binomial squared, that's x minus 5 over 2. I've still got a blank here I have to fill in to make it a perfect square trinomial. And so I have to square this fraction to figure out what goes there. You could write it like this for a second if you want to, at first, and then go back and simplify that. When you simplify that, you get negative 5 times negative 5 on top and 2 times 2 on the bottom. Remember, it will always be positive because you are squaring it. Let's look at another one. All right. Go ahead and pause on this one. I'll give you a chance to try it yourself. Okay, so b is negative 11, so half of b is negative 11 over 2. Negative 11 over 2 squared is 121 over 4, because negative 11 times negative 11 is 121. 2 times 2 is 4. It's okay that that's a fraction. Just leave it. That's fine. And over here, that becomes x minus 11 halves squared. Whatever I got when I took half of b, that's what goes here. Let's do one more like that. How about this? Okay, so on this one, I want you to figure out 2 things. All right, this is going to be, let's see, we're up to number 9. Figure out what goes there. And number 10 is going to be what goes here. Okay. And again, I'm not really looking at this as an equation. It's more like a result. So let's do that. Okay, so try that one. Hopefully you've already tried it. Let's go ahead and do this. Half of b means 9 over 2. Square that, I get 81 over 4. And this becomes plus 9 over 2. All right. Now I'm going to give you some more to try. And you're going to put your answers down on your paper. I said number 1 through 10. We're going to keep going. Go up to 20. Okay, so you've already numbered your paper 1 through 10, and you've already got those answers, and you should be able to check those answers because we went over them. And now I'm going to give you 11 through 20. So you're completing each one of these, and here you're going to put plus a number or minus a number for all of these. Plus a number or minus a number to complete the binomial. In other words, you're trying to make it look like this. Could be minus, could be plus. Okay, so that's just a blank. So here we go. This is going to be number 11. This is going to be number 12. Number 13. Number 14. Number 15. Whatever's here is number 16. Number 17. Number 18. Number 19. And number 20. Remember, these should all be positive, but make sure you include the sign on this. If you don't have a sign, I'll assume you mean plus. Okay, so get all of those done. Save all your answers, 1 through 20. And then you're going to go to the Google form and you're going to fill in your answers for these. Feel free to go back and watch the video if you need to again. And I hope this has helped you, and we will carry on with more of this tomorrow. Thanks, and see you then. Bye.